Have you ever wondered what it truly takes to move the world? Not with force alone, but with the power of mercy, wisdom, and conviction that outlives even the greatest empires. In a sunburned land blurred by war and hope, there rose a name whose legend defied centuries, Sultan Salahuddin Ayyubi. To some, he was simply Saladin, the lion of Islam; to his enemies, an indomitable foe; to the oppressed, a whisper of hope; to history, an answer to the dreams and sorrows of many generations. Our story does not begin in a palace, but in hardship. It begins beneath the silent desert sky, where a young Salahuddin, Yusuf ibn Ayyub, found himself the son of a Kurdish family growing up far from thrones and crowns. The world around him was racked by division. The Abbasid Caliphate, once the heart of Islam, had been reduced to a shadow in Baghdad. Syria and Iraq were split by squabbling warlords. Egypt, once glorious, now bowed under the corruption of the Fatimids. And far off in Jerusalem, the greatest wound of all, Crusader flags flying over Masjid al-Aqsa, the sacred city lost for nearly a century. But fate, woven quiet as the Arab night, was already stirring. Salahuddin's uncle, Shirkuh, commander of the renowned Nuruddin Zangi, took the young nephew alongside him on missions that would unknowingly shape the conqueror of tomorrow. It was here that Salahuddin learned the meaning of patience, witnessing firsthand the fragile politics and betrayals twisting the Muslim world. Where others sought glory, he studied quiet humility. When others lusted for power, he cradled justice and compassion above all. Yet destiny never arrives with a gentle knock. When Nuruddin Zangi, the just ruler of Syria, sensed the tides shifting dangerously in Egypt, he dispatched Shirkuh and Salahuddin into that turbulent land. Egypt was then ruled by the Fatimid dynasty, their rule a hollow shell, caliphs mere puppets to powerful viziers. Corruption and intrigue had sapped the spirit of Cairo. But in this era of shadows, Salahuddin's light first truly shone. After Uncle Shirkuh's death, the responsibility to govern Egypt, once unthinkable, fell upon his young shoulders. At first, Salahuddin seemed an unlikely ruler, but in an age where gold spoke louder than prayer, he gave Cairo a miracle. Opening the city's vast treasure vaults, he divided its riches among the poor. Not a dirham did he keep. Streets that shuddered in fear now buzzed with hope. Even his rivals were forced to whisper, "Who is this governor who empties treasuries for beggars, yet never loses his resolve?" His rise, however, came at a terrible cost. The passing of Nuruddin Zangi ripped old alliances apart. Faithful friends became cunning foes, and from Baghdad to Damascus, swords flashed over claims to thrones and titles. Egypt itself, newly under Salahuddin's rule, became a stage for plots dark enough to poison the bravest hearts. But the Sultan's answer was not tyranny. It was unbreakable patience, a devotion to unity greater than vengeance. Where others sowed discord, Salahuddin built bridges, each truce another stone in the fortress of Ummah. Yet peace is a guest seldom long in such lands. The Crusader states, emboldened by their hold on Jerusalem, eyed Salahuddin with suspicion and envy. Skirmishes flared, swords flashed, and armies clashed beneath the blood-red sun. For Salahuddin, the greatest heartbreak was not the swords of foreigners, but the betrayals of his own. Men who should have been brothers, but for petty pride, fueled the fires of war across Aleppo, Mosul, and Damascus. Among his enemies, none plotted darker than the infamous Batinis, the so-called assassins of Syria. Their leader, Sheikh Sinan, ruled over a mountain stronghold at Masyaf, training followers to kill in silence and vanish like ghosts. More than once they crept into Salahuddin's camp, blades glinting in the moonlight. Once they left a dagger upon his very pillow with a message, "You are within our reach. Beware." Where a lesser man would have drowned in paranoia, Salahuddin instead sought peace, even with those sent to slay him. And in a twist as strange as any legend, the man who thirsted for his blood became an honored guest, cementing the Sultan's name not only as a fearless warrior, but as a builder of harmony where only hatred seemed possible. Salahuddin's true test, however, would be written not in the tents of enemies or the courts of sultans, but on the fields outside Jerusalem. By now, the Crusader lords had grown bold, none more so than Reynold, a man whose treachery seemed endless. He attacked merchant caravans, broke sacred truces, even threatened pilgrims and the Sultan's own sister. When news of this brutality reached Salahuddin history records, his blood boiled with anger, but his response was never blind rage. With prayer and long patience, he called his allies, summoned men from across Egypt and Syria, binding the fractured Muslim world into a single purpose: justice, not revenge. The stage was set for one of history's most legendary confrontations, the Battle of Hattin. On the dry, rocky plains near the twin horns of Hattin, the fate not just of Jerusalem, but of a religion, a people, and a century would be decided. The odds seemed overwhelming. The Crusaders, led by King Guy and the dreaded Reynold, held aloft the true cross and believed victory assured. But Salahuddin, knowing the hardships ahead, chose ground wisely, stations his men by precious springs, vows that no Muslim will kneel to humiliation. As the Crusader army marched, they faced a scorching, unrelenting sun and miles of barren land. Water grew scarce, exhaustion gnawed at their resolve, and doubt slithered through their ranks. Some of King Guy's commanders pleaded for caution, reminding their king that thirst could defeat them before swords ever clashed. But pride pressed the Crusaders onward. They carried with them their most prized relic, the fragment of the true cross, believing victory ordained. Night brought no relief. Salahuddin's men, wise to the land, set fire to dry grass and hay near the Crusader camp, smoke and heat turning the parched soldiers' dreams into nightmares. Thirst, fear, and confusion gnawed at the bravest knights. By dawn, morale was already breaking. On that fateful morning of July 4th, 1187, the battle erupted in a whirlwind of courage and chaos. Muslim archers loosed volleys of arrows that darkened the sky. The Crusaders, weakened and desperate, managed one last devastating charge, but found themselves ringed by Salahuddin's disciplined soldiers. In the swirling melee, the true cross was captured, its power overthrown in sight of both armies. King Guy and Reynold were taken captive, along with thousands of their men. What happened after the battle set Salahuddin apart. When the Crusader prisoners were brought before him, hot with wrath for the atrocities committed, especially by Reynold, Salahuddin offered King Guy cold water to quench his deadly thirst, a gesture of mercy even to an enemy king. But for Reynold, who had repeatedly broken his word and attacked the innocent, Salahuddin personally answered with justice, ending his life as a warning to those who would violate peace and honor. Yet for the ordinary prisoners, Salahuddin's mercy became legend. Many were treated with compassion, even released. For one moment in the history of war, the victors became models of dignity. The victory at Hattin shattered Crusader power in the Holy Land. Cities fell quickly to Salahuddin's forces, stronghold after stronghold, as news of his mercy and strength swept across the region. But the true prize, Jerusalem, remained. This city, for which rivers of blood had flowed, which mothers and children had dreamed would return to Muslim hands, now stood before him, proud and frightened. Jerusalem's Christian defenders, remembering the horrors of its conquest by Crusaders nearly a century earlier, the fire, the massacre, the rivers of blood, feared an equal vengeance. But they did not understand the heart of Salahuddin. When their leader, Balian of Ibelin, pleaded for mercy, the Sultan, recalling the example of the Prophet Muhammad at the conquest of Mecca, responded not with revenge, but with conditions of honor. The gates opened. Every man, woman, and child who could pay a fair ransom was set free. Those too poor were also released, their freedom bought with the Sultan's own treasure. The city was returned to Muslim prayers. For the first time in decades, the call to prayer soared once again above the dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa. Yet Salahuddin did not drive out the city's Christian inhabitants. He ordered protection for their churches and allowed those who wished to leave to take their property, dignity intact. News blazed over land and sea. Christian Europe reeled with anger and disbelief. Women in France sold their jewelry to finance a new crusade. Kings and popes thundered that Jerusalem must be retaken. From Britain came Richard the Lionheart, a monarch as fierce and proud as any alive. The Third Crusade began, shaking the world anew. Yet even in the crucible of these new wars, Salahuddin carried himself with dignity that astonished his fiercest enemies. The battles between Saladin and Richard became the songs of legend, savage, heroic, but never monstrous. When Richard's men fell ill in the Syrian heat, Salahuddin sent them water and fruit. When Richard lost his horse, Salahuddin gifted him another. They fought for cities, for honor, for faith, but not for the destruction of humanity. The wars were long, and not every day was crowned in triumph. Salahuddin's armies suffered, too, setbacks, shortages, lost friends and brothers in arms. After years of struggle, a peace was brokered. Jerusalem, shining still, remained under Muslim protection, but Christian pilgrims were allowed to visit their holy places. Neither side claimed total victory, yet the world remembered who showed grace in victory and who showed courage in defeat. Salahuddin returned to Damascus, his capital, a legend in life. But though kings and warriors would have gathered riches and gold, he died nearly penniless. In the final moments of his life, those at his bedside heard the Holy Quran recited, which had always been a solace to him in struggle and peace. He left behind no fortune but a memory of a ruler who forgave, gave away wealth to the poor, protected the innocent, and stood by what was just, even if it meant forgiving his enemies. When word spread of the Sultan's death, people of Damascus poured through the silent streets, weeping openly, mourning not just a king, but a father they felt they had lost, a symbol of hope in an age of darkness. What can we learn from Salahuddin Ayyubi? That true greatness is measured not in the lands you conquer or the palaces you build, but in the mercy you show, the justice you hold sacred, and the hope you breathe into the lives of others. In every age, there are those who choose the sword, and those who choose to heal the world left wounded by it. Even after his passing, the legend of Salahuddin Ayyubi only grew brighter, casting its light forward through generations. In the streets and mosques, stories of the Sultan's justice and humility filled the mouths of storytellers and poets. Fathers taught their sons how Salahuddin never built his glory upon the suffering of another. Mothers taught their daughters how he guarded the dignity of every woman, whether friend or former foe. The name Salahuddin came to mean hope, courage, and mercy, three gifts a wounded world never ceased needing. But the journey from obscurity to greatness is never a straight line. Long before the banners of war unfurled on the plains of Hattin, Salahuddin had been forged in the quieter fires of adversity. As a young man, he was not the strongest of his peers, nor the most feared. Indeed, many doubted that a gentle-hearted Kurd from a remote family would become anything at all. Yet he was raised by men who believed that true leadership is a service, not a crown. His father Ayyub instilled in him a reverence for learning and compassion. His uncle Shirkuh was both teacher and shield, sharing with young Salahuddin the secrets of the world while urging him never to be hasty with the sword. Humility, elders told him, is the root that lets a man grow tall in the eyes of God. These lessons would one day separate the Sultan from lesser men, discipline in youth, patience in hardship, gratitude in victory. When Salahuddin journeyed with Shirkuh into Egypt, few could have guessed what awaited them. The splendor of Cairo could not hide the city's rot. Poverty pressed against palace walls, the Fatimid caliphs isolated and powerless. It was a time of chaos, where rival viziers played games of loyalty for scraps of power while the people shook with uncertainty. Salahuddin observed all, quietly understanding that the sword might win a battle, but a just ruler alone can heal a nation. After Shirkuh's unexpected passing, Salahuddin found himself thrust into command. Leaders rose and fell quickly in that turbulent land, and many in the city viewed him as an outsider. In the first days, whispers spread. He is too soft, too foreign, too inexperienced. But Salahuddin did not answer with boasts or threats. Instead, he poured effort into reform. Criminals faced fair judgment, the needy found doors open, the coffers spent on charity and defense rather than banquet and vanity. Gradually, Cairo began to change. Where there had been fear, trust began to flicker. The city became not only a base of power, but a haven for the persecuted and the poor. Yet peace was only ever a brief visitor. With the death of the just ruler Nuruddin Zangi in Damascus, new storms gathered over the lands of Islam. Dreamers and traitors alike rose to claim mantles they had not earned. Salahuddin faced conspiracies. Some courtiers plotted to unseat him, some generals abandoned him. Worse, old enemies saw new opportunities. Crusaders to the west, hostile warlords to the north, secretive assassins lurking in the mountains. In this season of testing, Salahuddin's faith shone bright. He refused to be divided. Instead of seeking new enemies, he sought new alliances. Instead of ruling by fear, he sought the trust of his soldiers, not just their obedience. In him, men found a leader who wept with them in loss and rejoiced with them in victory. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, dissident voices faded, and even rivals who once spat his name in anger started to look to him for guidance. Salahuddin's greatest strength was never the sword he carried, but his steadfast loyalty to justice. There is a tale of a day when a Christian mother came to him, desperate and in tears, her child kidnapped by raiders. Soldiers might have ignored her, for she was of the enemy's faith, but Salahuddin ordered his men to scour the countryside until the child was returned to her arms. Such episodes, countless yet seldom recorded in official histories, did more to conquer hearts than any army. As the threats against him multiplied, Salahuddin realized the fractured state of his world could not stand. He worked day and night to unite Egypt and Syria, not for his own glory, but to heal the Ummah. Letters flew across deserts, treaties drafted, invitations sent to scholars, imams, soldiers, and rulers. Walls of suspicion came down. Even those who would never be friends were brought to the table, drawn by his patience and unwavering call for unity. The greatest gamble of his life soon arrived. Knowing that Jerusalem must be reclaimed, not merely for land or glory, but as a matter of principle and faith, he moved carefully. The memories of the Crusaders' original conquest lingered like a wound, men, women, and children slaughtered, sanctities violated, pain long remembered. Salahuddin swore that, if God granted him victory, he would answer cruelty not with cruelty, but with justice and compassion befitting the teachings he honored. The march to Jerusalem is still sung of to this day. With each city liberated on the way, with each fortress surrendered, his reputation for mercy spread. Enemies offered less resistance, relying on his promises that no innocent would be harmed. When at last Salahuddin reached the holy city's gates, defenders braced for horror but instead witnessed dignity and conquest. He restored holy sites, protected the weak, and established peace, so different from the bloodshed of decades before. Even some of the defenders remained, unable to imagine better rulers. The story of the conquest of Jerusalem became more than history. It became a living parable, retold in every generation with awe. News of Salahuddin's victory raced across the world. To the minarets of Cairo, the gardens of Damascus, the crowded bazaars of Baghdad, and the candlelit churches of Europe. For Christians, it was a loss so profound that mothers wept and kings trembled. For Muslims, it was the restoration of a trust, a fulfillment of bittersweet longing and ancient prayer. But what truly made the world shiver was not the capture of stones and walls, but the character of the man who took them. When Salahuddin entered the gates of Jerusalem, he forbade his soldiers from vengeance or cruelty. The city's Christians and Jews found unexpected safety. Churches were protected, not desecrated. Holy sites restored, not razed. The Sultan's mercy, echoing the forgiveness of the Prophet at Mecca, stood in stunning contrast to the carnage that had marked the Crusaders' conquest nearly a century before. So it was, as diplomats and priests came to negotiate, Salahuddin offered terms strict but just. Ransom was set. Prisoners could buy their freedom, but the poorest were freed at the Sultan's own expense. His own treasuries were opened, and gold poured out not to embellish palaces, but to buy liberty for strangers and lift suffering without regard to faith or homeland. The defeated marveled at their conqueror. Some wept not at their loss, but in gratitude for dignity preserved. In the courts of Europe, the response was rage and a burning sense of humiliation. The Third Crusade gathered like a thunderstorm. Richard the Lionheart, king, warrior, legend, vowed to reclaim Jerusalem at any cost. Like waves crashing against the shore, armies met and collided. From Acre to Arsa, fields turned red with blood, but still Jerusalem did not fall. Hard lessons of war were learned. Sometimes victory lies not in the taking of cities, but in the winning of respect even from your enemies. Between Richard and Salahuddin, a strange respect blossomed amidst the agony of war. When Richard fell ill, Salahuddin sent him the best physicians, cool water and syrup to ease his fever. When Richard's horse was killed in battle, Salahuddin sent him a replacement, signaling that chivalry and honor cut deeper than the sword. They were rivals, not monsters. The world, watching and waiting, saw in these gestures a flicker of what faith can be when lived with conviction. Still, hardship and uncertainty shadowed Salahuddin's later years. Armies had to be paid, the poor cared for, rulers jealous of his fame whispered schemes. Peace remained fragile. There were more negotiations, more truces, and at times more heartbreak. Salahuddin sometimes seemed to stand alone, the burdens of an entire Ummah heaped upon weary shoulders. Sleep was a luxury rarely found, but his purpose, to defend the sacred, to heal division, to embody the compassion taught by his prophet, remained unbroken. He never answered betrayal with betrayal. Even those who plotted against him were sometimes forgiven, sometimes warned, sometimes brought close to remind them that justice, too, is an act of mercy when wielded by the wise. His own possessions grew few, as what little he had was habitually given away. Wanderers and orphans were fed from his table. The treasury, even in lean times, was more open to the poor than to generals. To rule, he believed, was to be responsible for every tear and every hope in a land once torn by sorrow. Toward the end of his life, Salahuddin's health began to wane. His final wish, unfulfilled, was to journey to Mecca for the Hajj, to walk where the Prophet had walked, to whisper prayers in the sacred precinct. But the demands of his people and the duties of state pulled him always back. The work of healing a broken world was all-consuming. When he fell ill, the concern spread swiftly. Physicians sat by his side reciting the Quran as word reached every open window and every market. The Lion of Islam is weak, his fight with sickness, his last great battle. On his deathbed, he smiled faintly at the recitation, lips moving in silent prayer. Those present later recalled, there was nothing left in his house but a single dinar, a few dirhams, and a soul spent entirely for the sake of others. When he took his final breath, Damascus fell into mourning. its streets filled with weeping, rich and poor alike stunned at the loss. He left no gold, only forgiveness, no palace, but a world made gentler for his passing. Legends say that after Salahuddin's death, a French general, centuries later, came to his simple tomb and declared with pride and sorrow, "We have returned," marking the ever-turning wheels of time. Yet, even then, the memory of Salahuddin as a symbol of justice and mercy stood untouched by the conquests of empires. The world would try again to name him warrior, conqueror, emperor, but words fell short. He was, above all, someone who returned hope to the hopeless and faith to those who thought righteousness extinct. In the eyes of those he led, and even those he defeated, Salahuddin became more than a man. He became a measure for all those who would call themselves leaders. In the centuries that followed, the shadow of Salahuddin Ayyubi stretched across the ages, resurrected each time justice was threatened or courage was needed. His story passed from the pulse of Damascus to the breathless hush of distant lands. Generation after generation, teachers pointed to him, not for the battles he fought, but for the reasons he fought them, never for glory, never for vengeance, always for something far deeper, the hope that even in the darkest times, goodness can prevail. People remembered how the Sultan would wander quietly among his people at dawn, unannounced, without guards, stopping to greet an elder or offer comfort to a crying child. He gave freely and forgave even more freely. It was said, long after his victories, that the hearts he won were his true conquests, greater than any stone or city. When a mother lost her son or a widow wept at her door, it was not a bureaucrat who answered, but Salahuddin himself, with tears in his eyes and prayers on his tongue. In times of division and despair, his character became a mirror to those who would lead. Would they wield the sword out of anger or sheath it out of wisdom? Would they claim victory with pride or bow their heads in gratitude? Would they demand riches or empty their own hands in service? Time and again, stories of Salahuddin reminded rulers that the greatest empires are born not of steel and gold, but of integrity and mercy. He was often invoked when the world seemed hopeless, when faith felt tested beyond endurance. In places where oppression reigned, in broken lands yearning for dignity, a verse or tale of Salahuddin could spark courage again. Teachers would remind restless young souls, "Greatness is not measured by how many kneel to you, but by how many are lifted to their feet because you refuse to let them fall." The city of Damascus, with its gardens and minarets, always called him our Sultan. Pilgrims seeking his tomb would find it humble, a simple stone beneath the shelter of trees, a place for silent prayer. Some brought flowers, others coins for the poor. All brought the hope that something of his spirit might bless them as well. You could not walk away from Salahuddin's memory without feeling challenged to be a better version of yourself.
Even the world's greatest adversaries, with time, grew to speak his name with a certain respect. Crusader chroniclers, who had once feared and cursed him, later wrote of his justice and generosity. Their songs and stories spread across Europe, so much so that centuries later, knights would cite Salahuddin as a model of chivalry, a reminder that one's enemy may yet be worthy of admiration. What remains, then, of the real story of Sultan Salahuddin Ayyubi? It is not locked in dusty libraries or crumbling battlefields. It pulses in every act of kindness, in every choice for peace over revenge, in every moment when the powerful defend the weak without expectation of reward. His life teaches us that the path to true greatness is hard and narrow, built on countless sacrifices, many of which go unseen and unspoken. So, when you hear his name, let your heart remember not just conquest, but compassion, not only victory, but virtue. The legacy of Salahuddin Ayyubi endures, etched not in monuments, but in the silent prayers of the oppressed, the grateful sighs of the released, and the upward gaze of those still waiting for justice. And perhaps, in recalling his story today, we are asked to be more than listeners. We are called to measure ourselves by those highest standards, to build, even in small ways, A world where ruthlessness gives way to mercy, where honor triumphs over hatred, where the greatest title is not sultan or king, but simply servant of justice. May the story of Salahuddin Ayyubi light the path for all who yearn to make a difference. For in every age, the world stands in need of such lions and such hearts. If this story has moved you, let it move you further. Share his legacy. Carry his lesson. Reflect on what our world could become if we chose, as he did, the harder path, the path of hope.